Hi, welcome to Hillcrest Sermons, growing together.
Show us your heart's delight.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is James, if we haven't met, and glad to be here together this morning. I hope we had a meaningful holiday season. I know around Hillcrest, we had the chance to celebrate Christmas Eve in this room together, so many of us, and it was a beautiful time. Lots of us here, lots of guests. After that, I don't know how many of you were here for the most props ever sermon here at Hillcrest from Carlo. It was fantastic. We had a fun time after eating some delicious pancakes. I don't know if anybody I heard we went through a lot of strawberries, I'll just say that. So I just love that we're in a season of doing life together as a church. Today, in this sermon marks the beginning. We're going back into the book of Mark. We began the book of Mark in the fall, and we went through the first 8 chapters. And today, we're going to return back to the book of Mark. Really, we're going to return back for 3 weeks. And then we're going to go into a series about the Broad Branches Initiative, which, we've been having conversations about the possibility of building the Community Resource Center. And now we're going to be in the public phase, talking about capital campaigns. So that's upcoming, really exciting stuff, just about the vision of where Hillcrest is going. So you can expect that. We're going to be in Mark for a few weeks, and then we'll be in the Broad Branch Initiative, and then we'll be back to Mark again. So you just can't get rid of Mark until we finish it. So just as a reminder, Mark is the second gospel in the New Testament. And Mark was written by a man named John Mark, and his aim was to collect eyewitness testimonies of people who actually walked with Jesus and to compile them for people to read. We benefited from his work, the fact that he did those. And as we have listed on the screen here, there are 3 major movements through the book of Mark. The first major movement we call the power of Jesus. So Mark 1 through 8. This is partly what we saw over the fall. There were many, many examples in the first 8 chapters of Mark where we see the power of Jesus displayed to people. We're moving into the section that we call Follow the Way. This is 8 through 10, and this is what we're going to be kicking off today. And then after the Broad Branches Initiative kind of sermon series, we'll get back into the last chapters, 11 through 16, the Crucified King. So this first section, the power of Jesus, it ends with Jesus asking a really challenging question to his disciples. Jesus had just fed 5,000 people with a few fish and a few loaves of bread, multiplied it. Everybody had their fill. He also fed 4,000 as well. There were many miracles that he performed, and he still found his disciples not getting it, not getting what he was about. And he ends this section with this question to his disciples. I wish I could have heard his tone, because he says, "Do you still not understand?" It's a theme for his disciples. I'm showing you what I'm about, and do you still not understand? That's how he finishes that section. So the section that we're going into, it's not exploring whether Jesus has power or not, but it is exploring whether or not his followers actually understand what his power is for. So right after college, I did an internship with our campus ministry that's connected here with Chi Alpha. When I was deciding what to do after graduation, I had this sense that before launching out into my career, that I ought to get the foundation of my faith, like to spend a little more time kind of bolstering the foundation of my faith. And so I stepped into this internship. Do we have any current interns or former interns in the room here? Yeah, we got, so this is something that people have experienced. So I stepped into this internship excited and confident, looking forward to what God was going to do. And one of the first learning objectives that we had was this lab called Bible study lab, okay? Which just sounds exciting. Bible study lab sounds like, it's going to be a good time. So this was a 10-week experience where you spent an extended amount of time in a single book of the Bible, and you went slow, painfully slow, line by line, word by word, chapter by chapter, and you're asking questions like, what is happening in this text? What is the author doing? What's happening what are they writing to? Why are they writing this? And before our first session, our first lab time together, we were required to read the book of 1 Timothy for 30 days in a row, not one time a day, but 2 times a day, okay? So by the time we gathered for our first lab, I had read the book of 1 Timothy 60 times. And I felt great about that. I was like, I know what is going on in this book, right? I've never read something so many times. I'm the kind of student, I've always loved learning. I was a good student. And I came into our first lab time really confident that I knew what was going on in this book. And our first assignment was really a simple one, right? Just broadly, after having read the book 60 times, you're answering these questions: who, what, where, when, why. Okay, the idea was this, this is the image. You are on an island stranded by yourself, and the book of 1 Timothy washed up on the island. It's all you have to read. And so when you're answering the questions who, what, where, when, why, you can only use that one book that you have in front of you. And the point of this is to cause your mind to really search what does the text actually say? Not what have we heard somebody preach out and about. What does it actually say? And so we gathered together, all of us interns, and began sharing our answers. And I was that kid in class that was always had my hand raised. And so I did that in the internship as well, sometimes. But every time I raised my hand, Brady, who was facilitating our lab, he would stop and ask, as I gave my answer, he'd ask the question so James, where exactly do you see what you just said in the text? We were answering quite who wrote this book? Well, it was Paul. Well, who is Paul? He's an apostle. What is an apostle? Well, he's a sent one. He used to be, he was crucified, or he was persecuting Christians, yada, yada, yada. And he's like, well, where is that in the book of 1 Timothy? And I was like, over and over. Oh, dang, I'm pulling from everywhere. Acts, Ephesians, and it's just, and I can't not do it. And so slowly and painfully, this thing became clear to me that even after reading this book 60 times, I did not understand what was happening in that book nearly as well as I thought I did. And this day, after this lab, this was probably the most frustrating day of my life. Not because I didn't want to learn, but because my picture of myself and my own understanding was being challenged that day. I thought before that day that I could see this text clearly and understand it, and I realized that I actually wasn't seeing it clearly. And I remember going home, I'm ashamed to say this, but I threw my Bible across the room because I was angry. And I went for a long walk to clear my head. And what I remember about that walk was it was raining in the fall. I was wearing suede shoes for some reason, and I decided to hike up the Arboretum. I ruined my shoes that afternoon. But what stuck with me wasn't simply that I had ruined my shoes, but it was this realization that I'd been following Jesus for a number of years. I loved the scripture. I wanted to grow. And I still couldn't see as clearly as I thought. I didn't have language for it at the time, but looking back, I can see it clearly now that I wasn't rejecting God. I wasn't walking away from faith, but I just wasn't seeing God clearly yet. And this is the major theme that we'll find in this middle section of Mark. The disciples they are going through a similar process that I went through in that Bible study lab, coming to understand that they don't see clearly yet. So we're going to walk through a number of different, we're going to kind of cruise through Mark chapter 8 and into a little bit of 9 and a little bit of 10. So just if you have a Bible with you, feel free to get that out. We're going to be just kind of cruising through some of these sections, and then we'll end in a story in chapter 10. So Mark is, again, the second gospel. It's far to the right in the New Testament. And one of the narratives about Jesus' life. So we'll start in verse 22, chapter 8, verse 22. 8:22 says this. So this is talking about the disciples and Jesus. They came to Bethsaida, which was a town that was in the north side of Galilee. And some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. So this part of the story, it feels familiar because up to this point in the first 8 chapters of Mark, that's what we've seen. We've seen people bring people to Jesus that have needs, and we see those needs being met. Miracles happening, powerful examples. And so this isn't new to us. But what happens is new. 23 says, Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. When he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" And the man answers, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." And so this is kind of strange. I mean, Jesus spit on a guy's eyes. That was kind of weird. But this is one of those moments that if we rush past it, I think we miss what Mark is doing. Jesus doesn't just heal this man. He asks him a question in the middle of this. He says, "Do you see anything?" And this should catch our attention because obviously Jesus already knows the answer to that. But Jesus is inviting this man to name his own condition. And the man, he answers honestly, and I think uncomfortably, maybe I would be disappointed, but he says, "Yes, I see people. They look like trees walking around." And so in other words, yes, something happened, but not enough. Right? He's no longer blind, but he's also not whole either. And that's a strange place to be because partial sight, it can feel like progress. Like I can see something, which means that he can function a little bit better than he was, but he can't see clearly enough to navigate the world as it was intended to be seen. And when that happens spiritually in our lives, that is a dangerous place to be. Right? Not blind, but not clear. Something in between. And you think you understand what's happening, but really your vision distorts reality. And here's what's important. Jesus, when this man is at that point, he doesn't shame him. He doesn't say, "Hey, partial clarity is good enough." Jesus doesn't just simply move on, but he touches the man again. And Mark says it like this. He says, "Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes, and then his eyes were opened, and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly." This tells us something about Jesus, that he's patient with partial sight, but he doesn't want to leave us there. This man had been touched, but he still had a ways to go before he could see clearly. And in the past, Jesus had healed people instantly. I mean, he healed them without even being present sometimes. He healed them without touching them. He healed them with a word. Sometimes people would touch his clothing and they would be healed. But this healing is partial. And this is the only miracle in the Gospels that happens this way in stages. It's not a failure of power. It's a picture of understanding this miracle isn't something that Jesus is just doing, but it's something that he is showing, which is amazing. This story is a parable in action. At first, this man can see He can't see clearly. He's touched by Jesus. He can't see clearly. And then he touches him again, and this time he can see clearly. And Mark, he puts this story right here in this place on purpose because this is actually exactly where the disciples are at the time of the telling of this story. They're close to Jesus. They've had many encounters with him. They have listened to more of his teaching than anybody else in the world. They're following him, but they still don't get it. They still don't see clearly. They can kind of see, but their vision is still blurry. And as we continue on in this text, we're going to find out that blurry vision leads us to follow Jesus while still resisting his ways. So as we continue on, verse 27, it says, Jesus and his disciples, they went on from Bethsaida to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. Mark tells us in one sentence this location change, but this is not a quick walk. It is a 25-mile trek, right? So they're in Bethsaida, and then they travel up. This is 25 miles. So travel in the ancient world, this probably would have taken them 2 days. 2 days of walking, 2 days of meals, 2 days of conversations, 2 days of silence sometimes, 2 days of the disciples wondering, where is he taking us, right? And all this matters because Jesus asks an important question, and he does it when he's not in a hurry. He walks them away from the crowds. He walks them away from familiarity. He walks them away from the places where the miracles made sense even. And he leads them somewhere intentional. He leads them to Caesarea Philippi. This was a place filled with competing stories about power. Can we get that next slide? This is a place where Caesar is called Lord and God. This is a place where the gods are associated with strength and dominance and fear, and Rome's power, it seems permanent and unquestionable. I remember standing here in our Israel trip in 2029, standing just right in this area down here, and hearing about the fact that there was a temple for a monument to imperial power. There was a temple to the Greek god Pan, the god of nature, the god of untamed and instinctual life, of unrestrained desire and vitality. And this is where Jesus goes, and at this place he asks his disciples, who do people say that I am? And that's a safe question for them, right? Is who do they say that I am? And they begin answering. Some think you're John the Baptist. I don't know how people were thinking at the time, but some say that you're Elijah. Some say that you're one of the prophets. And then Jesus turns the question on to his disciples, and he says, but what about you? Who do you say I am? And then Peter answers, you are the Messiah. And this is the first time that one of Jesus' disciples have said this out loud. They've asked this question a number of times when they're in the boat with Jesus and he calms the storm. Who is this man? There's a number of times where they ask, who is this? And now Peter is saying, this is the Messiah, the one we've been waiting for, the Christ. Which is correct. Jesus, right after this, he says, don't tell anybody that you know that, right? He's confirming, you got it. You finally get it. But we then find out right after Peter declares this, that he actually still doesn't get the full picture. So he's seeing clearly enough to declare this truth about Jesus, that he's the Messiah, but he doesn't actually fully get the picture. And so I think as I reflected on this is important for us to hear, I think. Right belief doesn't automatically lead to right expectations. You can say the right words about Jesus and still resist the ways that he chooses to work. And that's why the miracle at Bethsaida comes before Caesarea Philippi, because partial sight can lead to bold confessions or declarations about Jesus, but also it can lead to deep misunderstandings about the ways of Jesus. And so, as we continue on in verse 31, Jesus begins to teach them plainly. And what he says is disconcerting for Peter. He says, the Son of Man, the Messiah, he's talking about himself, must suffer and be rejected and ultimately killed. And then after 3 days, rise again. And this teaching does not fit Peter's understanding of what it meant that the Messiah had come. And so, what does Peter do? This is Peter, I'm so thankful for Peter. Peter takes Jesus aside and begins to rebuke him. Can you imagine that? Let me rebuke you, Jesus. And Jesus, then, it's so interesting how the scripture says, it actually says he turns and looks at the disciples while rebuking Peter. And so, it's so interesting. But what Jesus says to Peter is, get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the things of God, but you have in mind the things of man. What's happening here? What's happening is that when our understanding of Jesus is incomplete, we end up filling the gaps with our own preferences. And then we call the results obedience. Peter, he's not rejecting Jesus. Peter thought the Messiah would come in power. He thought that the Messiah would overthrow the ruling authority, and that by what ends up happening is by rebuking Jesus, he's trying to reshape Jesus to fit his own understanding, and that is far more dangerous. Peter doesn't see Jesus clearly, even though he can see him kind of. So Jesus continues on. He gathers the crowd, and he begins to teach them, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves. They must take up their cross and follow me. And this teaching is before the crucifixion, right? It's before we all know on the back end. This is what I was doing in Bible study lab. We all know Jesus dies on the cross and then he rises again, right? We know that, but they didn't know that. So when he says, you must pick up your cross and follow me, deny yourselves, to them the cross meant shame and humiliation. It meant a lack of power and a lack of control. And so as Jesus is teaching them, he's saying, following me is not just about self-improvement. It's not about safety. It's not about winning. It's about surrender. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. And whoever loses their life for me will find it. Following Jesus doesn't lead to power. It reshapes what we think power is. The disciples at this point didn't get this. We're going to skip forward to chapter 10, but what happens in chapter 9 is a number of other examples where the disciples don't get it, right? We'll explore some of those in the coming weeks. But we're going to jump ahead to chapter 10, verse 46. And the story, now they're located in Jericho, which is south of the Sea of Galilee. This is something that I had never seen until studying for this. I think Mark wants us to notice something that we may otherwise miss. So this middle section, the follow the way section of the gospel, is bookended by two stories of blind men being healed. Okay, the first one we saw had this kind of partial healing, could kind of see, and required another touch. And the second man, which we'll hear about, he sees clearly immediately and begins to follow Jesus. And so Mark, he's not just telling us about blindness. He's showing us what discipleship looks like when our vision is clear, and also what discipleship looks like when our vision is blurry. And so let's meet this second man, Bartimaeus, and I'll just kind of tell the story here. Unlike the first man, Bartimaeus hears that Jesus is going to pass him, and he's sitting aside. He hears that Jesus is going to pass him, and he's thinking, like, this is my chance. He calls out loud as he can, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And the people around him, they shush him, like, be quiet, man, you're making a stir, like, stop. And it says he would not be silenced, okay? So he's, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And this man, he names Jesus rightly, that term, Son of David. It's not just about who is Jesus' great-great-great-great-grandpa. By using this phrase, he's declaring that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah. And he continues to call out until Jesus calls him over. And we get to verse 51, and Jesus asks him a question. He asks the man, what do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for you? And Bartimaeus, he knows exactly what he needs, and he answers, Rabbi, I want to see. I want to see. And immediately he receives his sight. And Mark tells us something crucial here. He says he received his sight and immediately began following Jesus along the way. And so he doesn't just see. When he sees clearly, he follows Jesus in his ways. And when we see Jesus clearly, the way of power gives way to the way of the cross. Bartimaeus, he knew that he was blind. And obviously the first man knew that he was blind as well. And we've got this bookend where Mark is showing us that you can follow Jesus. His disciples were following him and still not see clearly. And I know what that's like because years before the internship incident that I shared with you about, I didn't know that I was blind. Like before I followed Jesus, I thought I was being logical, like interpreting life through what I could see and measure and explain. I wouldn't have thought of myself as spiritually blind. I was reading the Bible, but I wasn't convinced that God was even real. And I've shared this before here, but one morning I prayed, not even sure that I was praying to anyone, and said, God, if you're real, do something right now. And I've always described it as what happened to me was that like when you receive glasses for the first time, that's the right prescription and you can actually see with clarity. What happened as I spiritually could see clearly when God opened my eyes, I didn't abandon logic or science, but spiritually I could now see. And when you go from not seeing to seeing, it changes how you interpret everything. And so I think the question that I have for us as we look at the disciples discovering that they can't see clearly, thankfully they wrote that in there for us to get it. They shared the stories. I can imagine, like, how did they get that story of Peter being rebuked by Jesus? If I were Peter, I'd be like, hey, let's leave that one out. Like, that's, But that took some humility for Peter to share that story with John Mark to be recorded for us, right? What does this mean for us? I think some of us, and probably all of us, are spiritually blind in some ways, right? Things aren't clear. Some of us are spiritually blind and we don't know it, right? Maybe we're like the first blind man. Some friends have been bringing us to Jesus, right? And the same invitation that Jesus gave to me and to the men in this story, I believe that he wants to give to those here who would say, I am spiritually blind. He wants us to see with clarity, and he offers that to us today. Some here might be like a Bartimaeus, who you've heard about Jesus or you've seen things that Jesus has done, and you say, I am blind, I want that. Jesus, have mercy on me. And I would say he would ask you that question. What do you want me to do for you today? He would ask that question to you today. For others, I think maybe we're like the disciples. Like we've been touched by Jesus and we're following him, but our vision, our understanding of him isn't quite clear yet. And in my experience, blurry vision doesn't always announce itself in our lives, right? It shows up in subtle and maybe even sincere ways. If we think about Peter, I think Peter was genuinely sincere when he pulled Jesus aside to rebuke him, right? He was sincere about that. I think some of us may do the same thing that Peter did. That we might pull Jesus aside and rebuke him and say, like, your ways don't fit my understanding or even what I hope God is like. Our vision is blurry. For some of us, I think blurry vision shows up in how we relate to various things in our life, like control. I think we follow Jesus, but we believe that staying in control is actually what keeps us safe. For others, I think blurry vision shows up in self-protection, right? Like we've been hurt, and so we stay guarded, so we follow Jesus, but we keep his people kind of at a distance in our lives. For others, I think blurry vision shows up in what we believe gives us worth or achievement, productivity, being needed, or being impressive. We follow Jesus, but we still believe that our value has to be earned. This is blurry vision. And I think for some, especially those who've been around church for a long time, I think blurry vision can show up when it can show up as religious activity without actual surrender. We know the language, we agree on the theology, but like Peter, we want to edit Jesus' plan instead of trusting it. And so I've just got a couple of questions that I want to send us out with. I think the first question that I would encourage, maybe you can write these down or take a picture. We'll just invite you to reflect on these, maybe to talk about them in small group. Where might you be sincerely following Jesus, but still filling in the gaps with your own preferences? And I think this is a question that we could ask ourselves for our entire lives, because we will continually, God will continually to reveal things. Hey, you don't fully get it yet. You get lots of it, but you don't get it yet. Where are we doing that? And I think as I prayed about this morning, I felt like the Lord would just want specifically to put this question in front of you, the same question he asked to Bartimaeus. What do you want me to do for you? I think that's a question for some of you, where you'd say, I'm here. What would you like me to do for you? And Bartimaeus declared what he hoped for. And I think that's an invitation for you today. And so the good news is that Jesus doesn't shame blurry vision. He touches it again, brings clarity into people's lives. The same Jesus who restored sight in Bethsaida, who restored sight for the second man in Jericho, he's patient with us. And we are meant to be a church of people who are gaining clarity in our walk with Jesus and then following him together. Clear sight leads to following Jesus in his ways. And so as we close today, we're going to move directly into communion. And communion is one of the ways in which Jesus continues to train our vision. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, when the disciples still didn't fully understand his last night of freedom on earth, his disciples still didn't understand. And on that night, Jesus took the bread and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body given for you, broken for you." And then he took the cup and he said, "This is my blood, which is poured out for you." Communion, it's a physical reminder of the way of Jesus. It reminds us that his kingdom is not built on power, but it's built on sacrifice. It's not built on self-preservation, but on self-giving love. And so every time we come to the table, we remember the way of the cross. And we ask that his ways would become our ways. And so as you take bread today, as you take the cup today, let this be a prayer. Jesus, help me to see clearly and shape my life by your way, not my own.
Thanks for listening. For more info, visit hcbellingham.com and join us any Sunday, 9 and 11 a.m.